The sweetest moment was the first warning. In the end, I'll tell you the phrase I wish I'd said. Dear daughter, it's night, and the silence weighs like a shadow. The pen glides across the paper, breaking the stillness. I write this so you won't repeat my mistakes. Back then, I was so thirsty for affection. Loneliness surrounded me, and when someone started showering me with compliments, I wanted to believe it was love. It was as if the words were waves of heat in a desert. I yearned for security, but I didn't realize there was a hidden price. The sparkle in his eyes seemed to promise everything I wanted. It was during dinner. He looked at me and said, "You're amazing. I've never met anyone like you." That phrase enveloped me. I wanted to believe it was an authentic connection, but shortly after he said, "I want you to know that I'll always be by your side." And I didn't realize. It was a disguised contract, an invitation to dependency, not love. Then came the small rule. He began texting me almost incessantly, asking where I was and who I was with. It seemed caring, but I felt the pressure building. "It's just because I care," he would say, but something inside me began to stir. I was losing myself in promises of forever that existed only in the air. But the truth is, he wanted control. With each message, the lightness became heavier. Thus, I began to drift away from myself, looking for approval in every quick and expected response. And then came the moment of consequence. The messages changed tone. One day, I ignored one. The silence was deafening. When I finally replied, he was furious. "Do you think you can just disappear?" Guilt swallowed me. I should have seen the signs. It felt like love, but it meant imprisonment. What seemed like an expression of affection was, in reality, a way to bind me. So listen to me carefully. When attention overwhelms you, it's time to slow down. If love comes with too many rules, stop. And if you ever need a clear boundary, use this phrase: "I value my space. If you can't respect that, we need to reassess." In the next account, I will share how I uncovered the truth behind empty promises. The feeling of guilt followed me like a shadow. Every unanswered message weighed heavily on my conscience. What I didn't realize was that the prison was not visible. It had no bars or chains, but rather words that intertwined with my very being. The days became a strange dance, smiling at others while feeling a storm inside. Interactions with friends turned into a minefield. I was constantly on edge, waiting for him to send a message, ready to attack my freedom. "You seem so distant," he would say, and the vulnerable tone sounded like a siren. "I just want to know if you're okay." But what I really heard was, "You can't pull away from me." I tried to divert, to seek moments of joy away from him. A night out with my friends, a hot coffee, carefree conversations. But there was always that echo, a reminder of the messages I received with both hope and dread. Returning home felt like crossing a minefield. With every step, I asked myself, what is he going to say? And thus, love transformed into a constant reading of signals, as if I were trying to decipher a language that wasn't clear. What should have been light became an unbearable weight. One night, while everyone laughed around me, I realized I was only smiling on the outside. Disconnection settled in my heart. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to feel life vibrating around me. But the only thing I realized was that I was more concerned about not disappointing him than about living in the moment. Hey there. In an act of silent rebellion, I decided to share with a friend what was happening. I recounted the messages, revealing the pressure I felt. She listened, concern etched on her face. "This isn't love. This is control," she said, her voice firm echoing in my ears. Her words hit me like a bucket of cold water, awakening me to a harsh reality. A new perspective began to blossom inside me. I started to question everything. With every compliment, I longed for acknowledgement. With every rule, I felt the urgency for freedom. What once seemed like affection now revealed itself as an invisible web, tightening around me slowly. At that point, a new feeling emerged. Anger. Anger at myself for allowing this. Anger at him for trying to shape my being. I started to imagine what my life would be like without those constant messages, without the rules disguised as affection. What did I truly desire? A love that felt like an echo, not a prison, a space where I could be myself, free from judgment or expectations. And then, on a clear morning, when the sunlight flooded the room, I made a decision. I was tired of waiting for a change that wouldn't come. I was tired of becoming someone I didn't recognize. I wrote a short and direct message. We need to talk. I'm not comfortable with the way things are. Doubt washed over me after I hit send. What if he reacted badly? What if the emptiness grew? But deep down, there was a spark of hope, a burning desire to break free, like a bird finally breaking through its shell, eager for the sky. And he responded. His reaction wasn't what I expected. The tone of resentment was evident in his words. Do you think I'm doing something wrong? You're the one who doesn't appreciate what I do for you. The desperation in his reply made me realize something crucial. He never really cared about how I felt. And then, I realized that the shadow we needed to face wasn't just his control, but also my own fear of losing what I considered love. It felt like love, but it meant a vicious cycle of pain and confusion. The lesson crystallized within me. It's not enough to recognize boundaries. You have to be willing to enforce your own. Instead of feeling guilty, I learned to look at what I truly wanted. Mutual respect, freedom, authenticity. So I let go. I let go of fear, guilt, and empty promises. And in doing so, I allowed myself to take a step forward. In the next account, I will talk about the fresh start and how to rebuild trust in myself after so many lies. After I sent that message, I spent days engulfed in an emotional whirlwind. The world around me seemed to carry on as always, but I was trapped in a maze of contradictory feelings. While everyone else moved forward, I found myself paralyzed, reliving every moment of that decisive conversation. The pain of the breakup wasn't just about losing someone. It was about facing the chasm that had formed between what I thought was love and what it really was. One day, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The same person who used to smile in photos now bore invisible scars from an internal battle. Her once bright eyes were dull, lost in thoughts about what I couldn't comprehend. I went to a cafe near my home. The aroma of fresh coffee invaded my senses, but it brought no comfort. I observed the interactions around me. Couples laughing, friends hugging. It felt so distant from my reality. I felt as if I were in a bubble, immune to the warmth of humanity surrounding me. Conversations became distant murmurs, and I couldn't connect. The pivotal moment came when, in an almost involuntary act, I began to write. In an old notebook, I let the words flow like a river finally finding its way. I wrote about the fear I felt, about the emptiness that had allowed control to enter my life. Each sentence was a liberation, a step away from the invisible chains that still tried to bind me. And then, a new feeling emerged. Courage. The courage to confront not just the relationship that had ended, but also the ghosts I had carried with me for a long time. What did I truly desire? What did love mean to me? These questions began to rise like flames, illuminating the darkness within me. One night, as the rain tapped against the window, I decided that I needed to reconnect with what had been forgotten. I started reading books about self-esteem, about the importance of setting boundaries. Each turned page was like a revelation. I remembered times when I'd lost my strength, and how that had shaped my view of love. I began writing letters to myself, instead of waiting for messages from others. "You are enough," I wrote once. And so, I built an internal dialogue that had been silenced before. Writing became my refuge, the place where I could be honest without fear of judgment. As the days went by, I realized that the pain, though intense, was an opportunity for transformation. The shadow that had previously followed me was now light, a constant reminder that I couldn't allow someone else to define who I am. With every word that came from my heart, a new layer of protection was formed. That's when I decided to seek professional help. At first, I felt hesitant, as if I were admitting weakness, but when I walked into the therapy room, I realized it was an act of strength. There, I learned to explore the roots of my insecurity. We talked about past relationships, about the little rules that had crept in without me noticing. The therapist helped me see that true love shouldn't come with those kinds of restraints. And so, after months of hard work, I began to rebuild my self-confidence. Each word of validation I gave myself resonated more strongly than any empty compliment anyone had ever given me. I started going out more, rediscovering who I was without the influence of others. I began dancing again, laughing, and forgetting the fears that had once consumed me. The final stage of this journey was accepting what had happened, understanding that the experience didn't define me, but rather how I chose to react to it. When I found that same cafe again, it was no longer a prison, but a place where I could simply be. Looking out the window, I realized that time moves on. People continue their lives, and so do I. I was ready for new experiences, new connections. Friendships deepened, and eventually, love returned to my life, but this time with a new understanding. I knew that the rules were mine to define, the space was my choice, and mutual respect became a priority. So my daughter, remember this. Love should not be a prison. When you feel suffocated, listen to your inner voice. True love brings freedom, not chains. What seems sweet can sometimes be poison in disguise. I had a sense of hope, and that should never be underestimated. In the next story, I will share how I embraced vulnerability and learned to love again, now knowing that my happiness comes from within. So, after that cafe where I finally allowed myself to be me, a new cycle began to unfold. It was as if every step I took was now aligned with who I truly was. Freedom was not just a pretty word. It was starting to manifest in everything around me. But there was something that still echoed inside me, a remnant of the past that stubbornly insisted on appearing, the fear of repetition. Each new friendship, each connection seemed to bring to the surface a ghost, the image of those suffocating messages. I found myself hesitating, like a bird that had learned to fly but still feared the heights. It was in one of these new interactions that the truth presented itself subtly. I met someone. He was kind, funny, and had a special way of looking into people's eyes, as if each one of them was the only one in the world. But when he started to get closer, my first reaction was to pull back. And then, I began to question myself. Was I really ready to open my heart again? Or would it just be a repetition of what I already knew? The fear manifested as a knot in my stomach, and I was determined not to let it dominate me again. I decided to be honest. In a moment outdoors, while we were having coffee, I took a deep breath and said, I need to tell you something. I recently went through a difficult experience in my life. He looked at me attentively, without interrupting, and in that moment, I felt that he was not just listening, but absorbing every word. I spoke about the love that turned into control, about how the rules disguised as affection nearly erased me. His gaze didn't change. There was no judgment or disdain, just genuine understanding. It was then that I realized he wasn't like the others. There was a safe space there, and it made me feel something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Time passed, and I started to allow small openings. He began to ask me questions about my interests, about what made me happy. I talked about books, music, travel, and with each answer, a new layer peeled away. I began to realize that vulnerability was not a weakness, but a bridge that connected me to him in a profound way. Hey there. The magical night had arrived. Amid laughter and good conversations, there was a moment when our eyes met, and he said, I want you to know that there are no rules here. You are free to be who you are. His words were like a balm for my soul, an invitation to authenticity that I never knew I needed. That moment was a turning point. With each meeting, I felt stronger, more secure. I began to relax, to trust. But like a reflection of the past, sometimes a shadow still passed in front of me. That internal voice telling me to protect myself tried to warn me. And so, I decided to be proactive. It was no longer about doubting the other person's intentions, but rather about monitoring my own reactions. I asked myself, how can I set healthy boundaries? Instead of repressing my anxiety, I chose to face it head-on. I began mentally writing a script for myself, a guide that would help me navigate these new waters. If you feel pressure, pause. If something doesn't feel right, question it. If your freedom is threatened, speak up. This became my silent mantra, an anchor in moments of uncertainty. Then, on one of those calm days, as I walked through the city, I once again saw a palette of vibrant colors around me. Flowers on the sidewalks, street artists. A light song played in the background, and paradoxically, the feeling of being alive flooded my being. Love shouldn't be a prison. It should be a safe space to grow and blossom. However, there was a challenge I knew I needed to face. The conversation about the past. I needed to talk about what I had experienced, and in doing so, create a mutual understanding. He deserved to know, and I needed that weight lifted off my shoulders. When I finally shared my story with him, the silence was profound. My words floated in the air, and I wondered if he could handle this part of me. But as soon as I finished, I saw respect in his eyes. He wasn't there to judge, but to support. The feeling of relief was incomparable. Reflecting on the entire transformation, I realized that each difficult experience had shaped me. The pain had become powerful, a catalyst for change. What once seemed like a detour was now a path illuminated. My journey wasn't over, but it was in this moment that I could truly begin to feel love in its purest essence. So, my daughter, always remember this. Vulnerability is the key that opens the doors to authentic connections. True love brings with it freedom, and when you allow yourself to love, do so knowing that each step is a reflection of your worth. In the next account, I will share how I learned to celebrate my journey, embracing each scar and every victory,